Hello plant friends, my name is Victoria and you're watching Plantastics. Today I'm going to be showing you this orchid. It's the Orchid Miltoniopsis. I'm going to be talking about where I purchased this, how long I've had it, and how I got it to rebloom. So first of all, I've had this plant for 14 months. When I purchased it, it was in spike and I just really wanted it because it showed like basically what the blooms would look like and it just seemed really exciting. I was in a super busy time and I was basically glued to my desk all the time. And when I'm in a super stressful state like that, I like to have a bouquet of flowers. Well, orchids are the best because they last for several weeks, whereas a bouquet only lasts a couple days to a week. So I purchased this for my desk and the blooms lasted probably like a month. And at the time I purchased it, it was in bark. So I left it on my desk, and then once the flowers had faded, I moved it into my propagation room, which has T5 Barina lights. They're the pinkish hue ones. They're pretty strong, and I just kind of left it in there. So when it was in there, it was with several of my other orchids, and they were all in bark. So I noticed that with this one, it needed to be watered so frequently. So what I did was I did some research and I found that these really like to be in moss or some kind of a substrate that's going to be more moist, whereas the Phalaenopsis that I was used to growing, they like to dry out in between watering. So this one likes to be damp to moist, and the roots, it almost makes sense because the roots are so much smaller in diameter than some of my other orchids, and I'm guessing that's why. So whenever I moved it to moss, I kept it in the same size pot, and then it grew a whole nother like pseudo bulb and it began to outgrow that pot. So I moved it to a larger pot and replenished the moss, and that's when I started to fertilize it. So I had it for several months, like 6, 7, 8 months or something like that. And once I repotted it and replenished the soil, basically I started fertilizing it. And that's when I started having all of these newer growths. And that's when this large leaf came out. And this larger leaf really protected the flower stalk and allowed it to grow. However, that did not prevent something from taking a few bites out of this whenever it was a tiny little flower. So what fertilizer did I use and what water do I use? So I use rainwater, or try to use rainwater or distilled as often as I can. Of course, sometimes it doesn't work out and I do end up using tap water. I really like using Schultz Bloom fertilizer. I kind of use it on my African violets, and I mix some of that for this as well. I also used an organic fertilizer. Pretty much whenever I would mix my fertilizing solution, I would use it on all of my plants, and it was just whatever I had mixed that time period. I fertilize this one every 2 weeks in spring and summer, and then when winter happens, I basically just cut that down to once a month. If you really want to see your plants thrive, I highly recommend fertilizing and changing the substrate. It is a great indicator if you cannot remember the last time you repotted that it might be time. It just might be time. But then again, I had a philodendron brazil and I've had it in the same pot until recently. I repotted it since like 2018 and it was doing great. So some plants, they like benign neglect, but if you have something that you're trying to get to flower, you really need to fertilize it or replenish the soil. Of course, there are other factors that go into that as well, but basically if the plant is getting the light and the nutrients from the soil or the fertilizer you're using, they're going to have all the energy that they need to create these very beautiful blooms, because blooms take a lot of energy from the plant, and the plant only really does that when they have enough energy to take care of like putting out new leaves and whatnot. So this one is very beautiful. It likes temperatures between 60 and 80 degrees. I currently live in zone 8 and it gets incredibly hot. So I have it outside and I'm going to leave it outside for summer just because I think it'll be happier. It's under a tree in a hanging basket with several of my other orchids and anthuriums too. and it likes the dappled light it gets from midday, and then it gets full on direct morning sun. And it really likes it. I've exposed this orchid to just a bit more light than some of the other orchids I've had, like the Phalaenopsis. Like, I keep it under my Barina T5s, and like I said, it gets direct sunlight in the morning and then some dappled light through midday. So for watering, I really recommend, I really like this pot. I'm going to show it to you kind of up close. So it has these little holes on the side, and that allows for there to be air. As you can see, there are some gaps in the moss, and that was somewhat intentional. So you don't want it to be so packed in there with the moss that there's really no air pockets. Air pockets with this type of moss are good, and it's just going to happen naturally. Like, you don't want to really cram the moss in there because you can damage the roots and whatnot. So I really like to water this I put some water in this tray, and then I just let it absorb, and the water goes all the way up. So when I did have it in orchid bark, I had to soak it in a bowl that kind of went all the way up to wherever the bark was, and allow it to do that way. But then again, like I said, I really recommend moss because it likes to be moist. And then if it's not getting enough water, these bulbs here, pseudo bulbs here, they're going to dry out and look really wrinkled. As you can see here, these are really smooth, which means that they're getting enough water. So this one's a really happy plant. I really love it. I am trying to grow it to where it has more mature bulbs, and it's a really large series of clumps together. And my dream is to have each one blooming. That would be so amazing. So if you did purchase one of these and it is in bloom, what you're going to do is you're going to repot it after the blooms have faded, and you can also cut away the bloom stalk, and you can keep it in the same pot or move it to a larger one. Honestly, it's your call. It really depends. If the roots are super healthy and the plant is so big, it just looks like it needs a larger pot, you can go up a pot size. Or you can do like I did when I purchased this one and it was done blooming. I pretty much kept it in the same pot, and then once it got to where it was doubling, I moved it to a larger pot. So it's really up to you and what your orchid looks like. So are you going to get a Miltoniopsis now? If so, comment which one that you're interested in. This is the, let's see. I think I'm going to say it wrong. It's Hajime Ono Rasberry. If you're looking at getting a Miltoniopsis, comment which variety and how many you have. All that sort of stuff really interests me. And be sure to like this video if you want to continue hanging out with me. I'll include some other videos here. Until then, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.